For this project, we will be depicting a traditional still life using screen filler and drawing fluid to draw directly onto our screen as if it were a canvas. I've already got my printmaking paper torn down into 9 by 11 size sheets. The first thing I'm going to do is use a pencil to mark out how big I want the image to be on my paper. I'm giving myself a 3/4 of an inch border all the way around and 1.5 inches at the bottom. Next, I'm going to center my sheet underneath my screen, and then very gently with a pencil, I'm going to transfer my image area onto my screen. Drawing directly on the screen mesh is not uncommon and can be very useful for this process, but please don't press too hard and try to use a dull pencil. The last thing you want to do is put a hole in your screen mesh. Now I have a window, so to speak, in which I can compose my still life. It's up to you what you want to draw, but I strongly recommend using fruit or small objects that you can easily arrange and view through your screen. Here I'm going to use screen drawing fluid, which is listed on your material supply list. It's not a bad idea to give it a good shake. You can tell it's the drawing fluid because it's bright blue. Using my favorite paintbrush, I'm just going to go ahead and draw my still life as I see it. The only thing I'm being mindful of, really, is staying within my pencil boundary. You're going to want to give the drawing fluid about 10 to 15 minutes to dry in the screen. During that time, I'm going to prep what ink colors I intend to print. Here I've got a gray, a green, and a magenta. These came from previous projects, but what I like to do is do a small test on a piece of scrap paper, and then I can see how the colors will live next to each other. I think I'm going to use this gray for my background, so I'm going to add a little white to it so it doesn't print too dark. Screen printing is very painterly, so don't be afraid to experiment and mix colors. I'll always add white or black to something so it doesn't look like it came straight out of the can. Meh, that didn't do much, did it? So I think I decided I'm actually going to print a solid flat color for my background. Similar to the first project, I'm just going to use tape to mark out a square that's the same size as the image area I already marked out on my test piece of paper. Just like last time, I'm going to try to do a good job with taping so that none of the ink squeezes through. And I'm going to use masking tape to give myself registration marks so I know where my paper needs to be when the screen comes down. Another trick I'm going to tell you about is something called off contact. Here I've got a tiny chunk of linoleum from the first project, and I'm just going to tape that to the underside of my screen. This will create an extra spring between the screen and the printing surface that'll help keep the paper from sticking to the screen. It's useful when you're printing large flats of color. Now I'm going to give myself a nice even bead of ink that runs across the width of my image area. When printing flats of color like this, you always want to give yourself a little bit of extra so you don't run out. Before I get started, I'm going to print my background layer onto the clear acetate so I can make sure my registration is correct for my good paper. Remember to use both hands and good even pressure. You want to feel the table and pull the squeegee towards you. Remember you're clearing all of the ink out of the stencil before you lift it up. I can see on the acetate that my print is even and smooth and it has crisp edges. This is what you're looking for. Now I'm going to take a minute and make sure that my paper is lined up. Then I'm going to remove the acetate and do another good pull. The first thing I'm looking for is that I have enough ink to cover the stencil. Then I'm using both hands with good pressure. I'm trying to clear all of the ink out of the stencil before I lift it away from the paper. You shouldn't see any globs of ink or mountain ranges. Your print should look smooth and flat and even. I know my video is sped up, but take your time to make sure that your paper is lined up with your registration marks and that you're getting good, even pressure with each pass. If you need to do several passes before lifting the screen, that's okay, as long as you get a good impression. Last one. Still looks as good as the first. Now I'm going to clean the ink out of my screen and off of my squeegee. I don't want any of my ink to dry in my screen mesh because then it'll be harder to get out later. I'm going to go wash this out in the sink. While I was printing my background layer, my still life had a chance to dry. The drawing fluid tends to stay a little bit tacky. That's okay. Next, I'm going to use screen filler to block out my entire screen mesh. Remember to give it a good shake. Unlike the screen filler, this stuff is orange, so you shouldn't get them mixed up. I'm going to use a Mapboard chip, but you can use an old credit card or a Venture card. And I'm just going to pour a little bit on here and squeegee it onto the screen mesh. Now, you just want to apply a little bit at a time, because if you add too much, it'll drip through the screen and you'll make a big mess. Being careful to move it around because you don't want one area to be thicker than another. Just keep moving it until all of the areas are evenly coated. And I'm also going to go up to the very edge of the screen so I don't have to use tape. I also scrape the inside of the screen too, so both the inside and the outside layers are even. Again, you want the screen filler to be as evenly deposited as possible. I'm going to set this aside to dry and put a fan on it. It should be ready in about 10 to 15 minutes. Now that I've checked that my screen is thoroughly dry on both sides, I'm going to take a damp sponge and I'm going to gently scrub the drawing fluid out of my stencil. You should see the blue start to dissolve and give way to the white mesh. I'm not using a ton of pressure. I'm going to gently do this on the outside and the inside of my screen until all of the blue drawing fluid has dissolved. What you should be left with is a painterly stencil of your still life. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry with a fan once again. Now that my screen has fully dried, I can go ahead and set up to print. I'm going to give myself a nice even bead of ink that goes across my image area. First, I'm going to print my stencil onto clear acetate so I can figure out my registration. I'm going to slide my good paper underneath and line up the previous layer I printed to the layer I have set up now. Once those are locked in, I can mark my registration on the table using masking tape. Now that my good paper is in place, I'm ready to make an impression. I'm going to use both hands and good even pressure to clear the ink from the stencil. Check out how the drawing fluid really captured my brush strokes. I'm happy with how this looks, so I'm going to keep going. Now that I'm done with that layer, I'm going to scrape the ink out of the screen and go clean it up in the sink. I'm also going to take a moment to clean my work area. At this point of the process, I need to completely clean the screen filler and the drawing fluid out of my screen and return my screen to a pristine state. It involves a lot of scrubbing, which I'm not going to show you here, but I've linked to it in the external project sheet. Just know that your screen should look completely clean like this one when you are done. To draw my third layer, I'm going to set my screen up on a couple of books. That way, I can look through the screen to see my first two layers and react to them with the screen filler and the brush. The next color I'm going to print will be green, so I'm just going to use it to mask out parts of the table and the top of the pineapple. Let the drawing fluid dry for about 10-15 minutes, and then coat it with the screen filler. Remember to apply it as evenly as possible. Once it's dry on both sides, take a damp sponge and dissolve the drawing fluid to reveal your stencil. After the screen is dry from that step, you're ready to set up to print. I'm going to line my third layer up on the acetate. And add my ink in an even bead across the image area. Now with my good paper underneath the acetate, I can line up that third layer with pretty good accuracy. Once it's locked in, I can go ahead and pull an impression. Those layers look super crisp because I'm using good pressure. Because the registration on this third layer needs to be accurate, I'm going to double check it with the acetate each time before I print. It might take a little bit longer to do this extra step, but it will be well worth it, because I will have a consistently printed edition. And I know I did good because my final print looks as good as the first. So as you can see, this method allows for some real painterly effects and offers a different visual vocabulary using the screen printing medium.